Hello and welcome to Partially Redacted, a podcast where we discuss privacy and security engineering and related topics. I'm your host, Sean Falconer, and today I'm joined by Rishi Bhargava, co-founder of Descope, and we'll be talking about authentication and identity management. Rishi, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Sean. Excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm really excited to have our conversation. And, I was digging into your background in preparation for this, and it seems like you've pretty much grown up in startups and in security, everything from McAfee to Palo Alto Networks to co-founding Demisto and now Descope. What has kind of kept you actually interested, engaged in this space or the, in and around security products for the bulk of your career?
Well, that's an interesting question. And you're right that pretty much, I think, other than my first internship out of college or in third year of college and one job, which is like first one in India, half I've been in security. I think what really interests me in security, and I have actually thought about it, is the fact that this is probably the only space where when you're building products, you're not only competing against other companies building product, but you're also competing against an adversary. So it's like you have to be constantly innovating. You have to be constantly thinking about what's next. So keeps you on your toes for sure. I think that's exciting, right? I mean, I think even in my first security company, Solid Core Systems, which I did, which was acquired by McAfee. And yes, I pretty much, no matter what I joined, I got acquired within few years, including even McAfee when I was there. And McAfee says, I'll be here. I got acquired by Intel. But I was pointing out on startups, that's the other part, right? I mean, in a startup world, you have to constantly think about what's next. How can I reinvent the stuff that we are working on? So that's I think, what has kept me going in the security startup world.
Yeah, startups weren't, high risk, thrilling enough for you. You need to throw in the fact that people are actually trying to break your system and take it down as well as on top of that. I think that's a really good point. If you're building, I don't know, an e-commerce product or something like that, sure, you have to, prioritize security, make sure people, a bad actor can't get in or something like that. But it's not at the same sort of level as people might be actively trying to, break the thing that you're building and trying to fix.
Yeah, and I think it's also especially when you're building a security product, people are trying to break into your product, but then they are also breaking into your customer's environment, and you're continuously protecting the customer's environment as well. So it's fun. I think you wake up excited every day.
yeah, it's like being on the front of a roller coaster every day.
Yeah.
And how has security changed throughout your career, though?
Yeah, I think that's actually, what I have seen is it's very interesting, right? Security, in some senses, has always lagged the technology advances, right? I mean, if I look at my first security job, 2003, at that point of time, basically, it was all about laptops, right? I mean, so laptops were becoming popular. People were moving away from call it the mainframes or call it the desktops and moving into laptops. And the whole security movement was around BYOD. What if employees bring in their own laptops into the work environment? How should the laptops be locked down? Then came mobile devices. So then the next set of thing was, how do you secure your mobile devices? Android, iOS. I remember, set of mobile security products that came around, and then the controls that app stores had to put in on all these devices. So that was the mobile security phase, which basically trailed the mobile devices. Then came cloud, and then there was this cloud security. And these days, again, now it's talking on the privacy podcast. Now it's all about privacy, because that has become, and the data has become a big concern. So the data security and privacy has become a big deal. So I think I would say the security I see as evolving as your technology stack or the new technology changes, and the new trends with AI now will tend to more to say is, how do you protect AI models? So that's I think one big thing, which is security is evolving based on what is the new frontier in technology.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's every time there's a paradigm shift in terms of how consumers are interacting with technology or people are building products, then security also needs to sort of like move with that paradigm shift and figure out like what's the new types of tools that we need to adapt, because you can't just wholesale apply the thing like, going back to desktop to mobile that worked in desktop to the mobile era, to the cloud era, and so forth. This is something I've talked a lot about when it comes to like dev tools as well. You see these shifts, like when we went from building desktop applications to web-based applications or to mobile applications, new tooling had to be developed to actually be able to do that in the right way. And it was like the companies that were able to adapt to those new eras that left the kind of old guard behind.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the other part of this, leaving the old guard behind and how technology evolves, I think the other aspect why security needs to be redone pretty much for every paradigm shift is the end user experience. And we'll touch upon more on some of these topics, because you almost like, I think we are getting to a point where you want the security and privacy aspect to be as hidden from the user of the technology as you can, while still keeping them secure. So you need to keep them secure, but don't put these big barriers in front of them to affect business or to affect conversion rates or whatever they may be.
Do you think there's been a shift in consumer expectation when it comes to products that also helps like motivate that? Is, I want things to be secure, but I don't want to have to deal with it myself.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting. The two things I'm seeing, and we see this a lot in our Descope engagement with our customers, and then how their end users behave with their products. One is, I think there's clear awareness that the user experience needs to be the best. You cannot sacrifice user experience in the name of security, especially in the consumer world. In the B2B or enterprise world, you can still do that, but I think you can do that because you can force your employees to do whatever in some senses, right? I mean, the IT and security teams can put in some controls. But even in those worlds, I think there is clear recognition by CIOs and CISOs that when you hire employees these days, when you hire younger, fresh out of college employees, they are growing up with the mindset of ease of use, information available to them on their mobile devices at any time. And that paradigm is being brought into the workspace as well. So both on the consumer and B2B side, there's this heightened awareness of experience needs to be the best. At the same time, privacy is top of mind. I mean, people absolutely are aware. They want to expect that their data is not stolen. They are becoming more and more aware on all of the online challenges. So I think what I would say is like the expectation by the end consumer is like, of course, if you are providing me service, you're protecting my data. But at the same time, you cannot rely on me to build or jump through hoops to get that security taken care of. And I think some of the companies, like I will kind of, an obvious example is, I think Apple has led that path very, very well to hide the complexity, but still secure the user, at least in certain aspects of device security.
Yeah, and I think they've done a really good job of also like using their focus on security and privacy as a like product differentiator as well. So they're actually turning those things into something that actually is like an ROI driver, because they recognize that consumers care about this, and if we do this right, we can actually grow our business rather than seeing it as like a barrier to innovation or something that like stops us from creating more revenue or something like that.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that there is this shift that's been happening in terms of like, I think we're sort of moving past the days when even in like an enterprise tool, you could be like, well, people will figure it out. It's the same thing like in the dev tools as well. It's like engine, they'll figure it out. Like even if it's a terrible experience, but like companies have been able to come along and actually like disrupt whole industries by creating consumer grade UX, but in a business product. And I think the same thing probably, it happens more and more in the security tools market, because if you make things like complicated, sure, like you could force employees to do something, but you're more likely, I think, to get human error or people who are like under a time crunch that are looking for ways to like move around something because it's like it feels like it's a barrier to them being able to do their job, and that leads to all kinds of potential problems for a company.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's super clear that these days the user experience and the feedback from your end users is being considered when choosing the product. I have seen many instances where a new product comes in, easy to deploy, easy to use, will completely come in and replace an existing incumbent, right? So I think definitely that is a big focus as companies are building product and as they're driving new innovations.
Absolutely. So I want to start to shift to talk a little bit about authentication identity. So according to the Verizon data breach report, something like 80% of breaches relate to password theft or identity. Like, why is this still a problem? Like passwords have been around for like 60 years, and it doesn't feel like we're getting better at actually making them secure. It feels like if anything, we're getting worse.
So yeah, I mean, I think the whole existence of password and the security challenges there. In fact, not just security challenges. I think the user experience challenges there have been around. People have dealt with it, and they have continued. I mean, I think if I look at the whole life cycle there, it's not that things have not moved. The password stayed in existence, but they've gone through few iterations, and there have been innovations that came in to, rather than replace the password, improve the experience of password on the consumer side. So what do I mean by that? So if you go back 15 years, people had passwords. Then the company said, hey, for security reasons, we want stronger passwords because passwords could be guessed. Now, the fundamental problem with this whole premise of need strong password is the opposing forces, right? If the password is not strong, the attacker can guess it. But if the password is strong, consumers will reuse the password because they cannot remember strong passwords and a lot of those passwords. So this tension between these two tends to drive behavior that people started to enforce strong passwords and the consumer started to reuse passwords. Now, if one of the services is breached, then guess what? You have a problem, and that stolen passwords could be used to break into other services. Now, this problem has existed. Here come around the password managers, which are promising amazing user experience, log in with different passwords. Every password is same on different websites. Every password is different on different websites. And I'm a big user of Password Manager, and that's fantastic, right? So one, it gives me comfort that if one of the website is compromised, and by the way, on an average, I get a notification that one website is breached every month, and that password is kind of assumed it's gone, it's out there, it's public. So they have stuck around. Why have they stuck around? I think I would put muscle memory. People know how to do it, they do it. Also, I think it's kind of the muscle memory or the inertia on the developer side. If you're building an application today, there's no reason to build it with passwords. There's so many ways to identify the user, so many ways to authenticate the user. So you could do that. So that's one, is inertia on how they've existed. But second is actually compliance in some cases. Certain industries need to keep the password because the regulation requires them to have strong password. But guess what? I mean, having no password is stronger than having a strong password. So I think they have stuck around. I'm very happy, but I think if you look at the new services being created in the last 2 to 5 years, a lot of them are not using passwords. In fact, I think in our internal data of our customers, we have a large set of customers, 10,000 plus developers on the platform building. We have seen the use of methods like OAuth, OTP, passkeys actually way more than the use of passwords in the new app build that's happening. So in the new startup ecosystem and new app build that's happening, these methods surpass the use of passwords way more. So I am looking forward to a passwordless future that way.
Yeah, you have no idea how good that makes me feel, because there's probably few things that make me more angry than trying to like remember some obscure like strong password while I'm trying to get into an application in like time is of the essence or something like that. There's like
yes.
nothing that like evokes more rage within me than that experience. And
I actually, Sean, that's funny because I have a friend. He says that he has a rule. I think he remembers passwords for his financial and few applications like his Gmail. Other systems, he always resets the password. He goes in, does a reset password, gets the email, sets something, logs in, and next time he does the same.
Yeah, I end up doing that a lot with, especially applications I don't like. I'm not in on a regular basis. You know, that's where the frustration comes in. Is like some application, I don't know, I'm signed up for Marriott's benefits program or something like that, and then I have to try to like. There's no way I'm going to remember that password that I set. And you mentioned that you essentially on a monthly basis get some sort of notification about a password compromise or something like that. I've definitely seen an uptick in. I've had over the last year or so. Every once in a while, I get like a check for like $3 in the mail, letting me know that because of some class action lawsuit, my information's out there, and it's like, here's the $3. Sorry, your social security number and your password's on the dark web. So that is definitely a trend that I've seen. So I want before we jump into some of those other innovations that are happening in the password space. I definitely want to get into that. If we are staying in a password world, just from a user experience standpoint, like let's say that I build an app and I roll my own auth, I have the username and password. Like, what are some of the problems my users, like the end users, actually going to run into with using a system like them?
Yeah, I think the biggest problem, Sean, I see is like the whole anything knowledge based on something right? So password is basically authentication by knowledge that way, right? You're going to have the challenge of how strict do you put in the requirement? Like, do you want length requirements, complexity requirements, so special characters, numbers, all of that. And if you add that, you can be rest assured that people are going to reuse. So one experience problem that your users will run into if you roll out your own auth and use passwords is the reset cycle. So I would strongly encourage, like if you, by the way, you should not use passwords, but if you have a reason to use passwords, building the app now, optimize the reset experience and think through what does the reset experience look like for users. Because guess what? I mean, you said it, right? I mean, you're in time crunch, you need an access to an application, you don't remember the password. How does it reset? Do you send an email with a link and that click of the link lets the user in and then they set the password? Or do you send them a temporary password, which is really bad, and they copy paste? So think through that reset experience because that is a user experience thing. Second, is make sure when you're building the front end of the app, there are, by the way, still sites I find which are actually not compatible with password manager. So if you are building with the password, please make sure your app is compatible with the password manager, because guess what? If it is not, then now you are burdening the user to actually copy paste the password from somewhere else rather than the autofill of the password managers. And third, I will say is do offer an alternate. Keep username password, do offer an alternative OAuth or other method and actually run that experiment. See what your users pick.
In terms of the reset experience, like what is like optimal for somebody?
So the right reset experience I strongly recommend is have the email as the login. Usually don't use username. So email as the login, have a forgot password button right there.
I hate it when I have to put a username in.
Yeah, it's like usernames are real bad. By the way, username has an inherent problem because now you're actually encouraging the reuse even again, right? Because if then you need to verify the email separately. So the onboarding experience becomes bad as well. So start with email, forgot password link, send a link, make sure the link is sent as an email, make sure your email reputation domain and other things are good because sometimes they end up in spam. So there are ways to take care of it. So be aware of that as an app developer. The link, clicking the link should take them to new password confirmation and they are in. And now when they set this, log them in because they just went through that verification. At this point of time, there is no reason for you to take them back to the login page and make them log in again, because that's another user experience problem, and that's not better security wise, right? Because you literally went through a secure path of email verification, clicking the link, setting the new password, they should land into your app. So that should be the optimal experience. Short circuit. Still, again, you took them few hops for resetting. You could avoid all of that behavior. By the way, I mean, at this point of time, I have seen, we will talk about strategies to migrate off of passwords. I've seen people, this is essentially a magic link that you did. So why do you need the new set of password? You just did the magic link, let them log in.
Yeah. If you assume that their email is secure and they only have access to that, then why not a magic link or some sort of, basically two-factor code that they type in?
OTP or magic link, whatever you prefer.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Exactly. Because and now even like most like streaming services, when you set them up on your TV, because it's kind of pain to basically use a remote to type in a password, they use some form of magic link, or you go to a URL and you type in a code or something like that, and then it sort of auto logs you in. Imagine if you had to like reset your password from your television every single time and then retype that in. It would be a horrific experience.
I have, by the way, ended up doing that. There are some services, I'll not name them here, some popular services which still don't do the code with the phone or don't do the prompt on your device, and you have to type in your password. And it's like, imagine it's like, how do I type in my password on my remote and I'm going right? And the keyboard, by the way, is not a QWERTY keyboard. It's A, B, C, D, E, F, G. It's like, oh my God.
Absolutely. So I want to get into some of these alternatives to passwords. So there's like more and more of these becoming mainstream, as you mentioned, like passkeys, magic links, social logins, even biometrics. So let's start with passkey. Like, what is a passkey for those that don't really know, and sort of how does those systems work?
So I think the best way to describe passkey is basically it's an authentication mechanism which ties the user identity to first either a phone number or an email. So some unique identifier which identifies the user, which can be verified. And then it ties the authentication to a device. So the way to think about it is the old, which has been around for ages now, decades now, the public-private key mechanism. In the passkey world, you generate a public-private key pair. Public key goes to the website. Private key stays on the user's device, be it a laptop, be it a mobile device. And this private key is then secured on the device using biometric. So essentially, what you have is Microsoft, Apple, Google all came together, agreed on a standard, and the standard started with an alliance called FIDO Alliance on the WebAuthn standard, and basically said the public-private key pair, we will secure the private key on the device using biometrics, and the authentication is now user puts in their email or phone number, unlocks the private key on the device using biometric, and that private key then sends a challenge sign with that private key. The server validates it, and user is logged in. So essentially, to simplify what the user experience is exactly how you unlock your iPhone, exactly how you unlock your Mac, or your Windows using Windows Hello, or with the password your device. So basically, you are unlocking the secure storage on your device as step one in the experience, but that logs you to any website. So the experience is beautiful, really, really nice. In fact, we have a demo of this built on passkeys.guru. We'll put in the link in the show notes. But the user experience is amazing, and it's way more secure than any of the auth methods, because guess what? You did a multi-factor authentication here. You verified the user with biometric, and you verified the device ownership because the key is stored on the device. So now to steal a passkey, you need to somehow get the user, not what they know, but the user, because the biometric is with the user, and you need to steal the device both. So very secure and amazing user experience.
Yeah, I mean, you're like significantly reducing the scale of where the attack surface can be, because if it's knowledge, then like you can get knowledge from anywhere, right? I don't need to be next to you. Even if I need to like socially engineer you, I can have a conversation with you. By the way, what is your mother's maiden name? Like like we can leak that into the conversation. But if I need to be like physically next to you, then I need to be physically next to you, steal your phone, maybe take a finger with me. Like that's a much more challenging system.
Yeah, in fact, even like you can fish OTP, right? People think, hey, phone OTPs and they're good. But the phishing OTP is not that hard. People get on the phone, convince you, says, hey, we just sent you the OTP, send it to me. But by the way, there is no way to send a passkey. Like the user never sees the passkey. So even if you trick the user, there is no way to get the passkey.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, SMS is an inherently insecure system, even outside of the social engineering aspect. People can do, SIM swapping and all kinds of different things. In terms of the private key, let's say I'm using my phone in this case, where is the private key actually stored on the phone? Like, how is that secured?
So I think that's an excellent question. I think gets into some of the technical details here, Sean. So the private key is stored actually in usually secure hardware um, system. So there's usually most of the devices, whether it's laptops and phones, they have like Intel has this whole secure enclave. Apple chips have its own hardware secure storage, which can only be unlocked with biometric. So there are hardware places and the memory where the private key is stored. Similar to, I think, in the Mac world, the whole keychain concept and where they are stored and encrypted on the device. So very, very secure. In fact, I think there have been no publicly known attacks to access those part of memories, and um, uh, multiple different layers of security have been put into place. So that's where the private key is stored. And the only way to get private key is to actually provide biometrics. Biometrics are actually also communicated over the hardware layer. So very, very secure channel overall.
Yeah, and we actually did an episode on enclaves with Arvind Raghu from AWS. So for anybody that's interested in kind of diving into that topic, I recommend checking out that episode. Maybe we'll link it in the show notes. And then in terms of what if I like upgrade my phone or someone like steals my phone? Like how do I then transfer these passkeys? Like, do I have to set all that stuff up again?
Yeah, so I think there's that's an area where I would still say a few advancements happening. So one is last year actually, Google, Apple, and Microsoft again enhanced the standard to say they will be syncing of the passkeys over the cloud. It's never stored in the cloud, but the sync can happen over the cloud. Of course, encrypted in transit. So the ways where the passkey could be on multiple devices. So your login experience from your laptop and your phone is not broken. If you set it up on your mobile, you can still log in from your laptop. All of those experiences. But if you completely did not have any sync setup, did not have any backup setup, yes, in that case, you have to reset it. But I think of it this way. I consider you changing or losing your phone once every 5-10 years experience. Changing phone is common, but in changing, you are easily able to migrate the passkeys for sure. That migration happens very seamlessly. But if you lost it, it's similar to resetting a password. It's similar to password managers. By the way, one of the other things which we didn't touch upon yet, most of the password managers are also now supporting passkeys. So if you're already using or your customers are already using password managers, the passkeys could be managed in password managers, which are then, of course, encrypted and synced and could be recovered very easily. So I think from that perspective, it's very similar from a from migration and reset perspective. But then the benefits of security and user experience is super high because you cannot even tell it to somebody. Um, So that's how it recovers. But I would say I feel there's some work needs to happen on Google, Apple, and Microsoft part for these recovery mechanisms, and they're getting better over time. Google rolled out passkeys last year. Amazing, right? By the way, on your Google account, you can set up passkeys. I love it. I have not been prompted for my phone OTP even when I log in from new devices in the last 3-4 months since I set up passkeys and Google rolled out passkeys. So excellent experience.
And then what about in terms of like single sign-on? Is that another trend that you're seeing people sort of move more towards, where essentially, like, I don't want to have to build all these systems or integrate like a passkey system or something like that. I can
Totally.
sort of offload that to, people using Google, Meta, whatever it is.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as I mentioned earlier, we track a ton of stats on login methods used by apps that are being built. Social login is number one among all of this. I think depends on your application, depends on your user, depends on how do you want the user to behave. In some cases, there is obviously a reason to rely on a social login. Let's say you're building an app, which is a retail app, shopping app, something like that. It makes perfect sense to actually do it a login with Meta. Why? Because you're going to probably use that OAuth token to post on users' behalf or share with your friends, etc. So there's some applications which are anyways more inclined to do login with Google, login with Meta, login with LinkedIn, login with GitHub. So those are the number one methods, by the way. In fact, I think more and more app developers are saying that's the best method. If my user is a developer, login with GitHub makes most sense. Everybody has a GitHub account. So we are seeing incredible high use of that. And in those scenarios, you could use passkeys as a second factor in case you see risky device, new device, etc. In other cases, when we have seen people don't use social logins, that is when they actually rely on a combination of OTP for phone verification followed by a passkey, because you do need to verify the phone even for a passkey or verify the email for a passkey. So those are the other set of combinations. But yes, social logins are becoming more popular. They are actually the leading method in our data that we have collected so far.
So I want to talk a little bit more specifically about Descope. So there's, clearly there's been existing, products in the identity authentication space, but like, what sort of motivated you to found the company, and what was it that you felt? What was a pain point essentially that you felt like other providers weren't, adequately satisfying?
So yeah, I think I touched upon this, right? I'm a big believer in user experience. One of the things, Sean, I believe, and I've said this, for a technology to be adopted widely, the reason needs to be either it's lower cost or it's easier to use. I mean, everything else, like look at solar panel adoption. It's like, oh, everybody wanted to be green. We started to put solar panel, but they don't get adopted unless the cost of solar energy is lower than the cost of your regular energy. That's kind of the normal man, right? I mean, it's everybody. Eventually, the adoption of technology comes down to, is it cheaper? Is it easier to use? So number one, developer experience for building passwordless experience and building all user journeys in your product. That's what will drive the adoption. So when we started to think about starting a new company, looked at different spaces, and it became very clear that when it comes to authentication, there were a lot of players. It's a very crowded space. But there is still simplification to be done, work to be done to simplify what does it take to build an auth method into my product. And it's not just the first time integration to make it easy. Is it flexible enough so that I can do more and more and more without having to do a whole lot of work? And that's the core of Descope. So we basically designed it as a workflow system. So you can come in and say it's just one screen, drop in social login, and your workflow will have 2 steps, social login step and a screen to click it. And you can integrate in 10 minutes. Like literally, we have customers who, matter of couple of hours, deployed the app live in production with the social login. But now, maybe tomorrow you come in and says, hey, I have social login, but I want to do a second factor auth with OTP. How do you do that? You come in, you modify the workflow, you put in a condition that is this a high-risk device? And if it is, do a second factor auth. You change the workflow, don't need to change your app, done. That's how easy to add a new auth method. You want to add more complicated geo-based logic, like if they are logging in from India, do a WhatsApp OTP. If they're logging in from US, use social login. Change the workflow, drag and drop, you're done. So the whole premise with Descope is, can we make that developer experience really easy so that they can go innovate and future-proof the authentication? And that's what drove Descope, and that's what differentiates Descope from every other auth provider, which is this whole concept of a workflow where you can keep changing it as you grow and keep innovating without having to go redo the app deployment.
Yeah, so you're creating essentially like a like higher level of abstraction from essentially implementing this. Like one thing to give people like a framework with like kind of the atomic units to kind of build this stuff, but then you still have to do a bunch of work. Like if I go and I want to support different experiences based on geography, then I need to figure out which geography the person's coming from, write a bunch of business logic to kind of map them to these different atomic units. If I can just sort of I don't know, like WYSIWYG that into workflow much faster.
Yeah, all of those logic could be now translated into a user journey which you designed on the screen.
And then what is sort of what are you seeing in terms of like adoption? Is it people who are moving from like maybe they DIY'd their own auth system and then they're looking for a new something that's like more robust where they're offloading a lot of this experience, or are you getting a lot of people who are actually converting from other competitors that are auth identity providers in the space and see this as something that's a better system to help like grow and scale their product?
I think the answer is yes to all of the above. I see three different motions. Honestly, the good news is I think there's a lot of new build going on as well. Right now, I'm seeing tons of new build, tons of developers, new apps being built. So there's one obvious one where which is the best provider to choose, which is the easiest, the right cost, because cost matters at that stage. We have really focused on a free forever tier, on a startup program. So that's been one segment. Second is they either have a homegrown or some other provider, and they are in this growth phase. They have good revenue coming in, and they now want role-based access control. They want SAML integration. They want risk-based MFA because they are a B2C company and they're starting to see bot traffic. At that stage, they have to make a decision that from the homegrown or internal system, which is one of the existing incumbent, do they migrate off? Do they continue to build on that? And that's a very good hook for us because this is the promise of future proofing. You can move now and then you can start to build on top of that all the time. So that's the second where we are seeing migration. We have migrated from pretty much, I think in the last 10 months of our existence, we have migrated of every authentication provider I've seen, from Auth0, Okta to smaller startup players. Everybody, we have seen migration. And the third I'm seeing is augmentation, where they don't replace it. They're continuing to use their auth provider. We have ways to integrate using OIDC, SAML, other ways. And these are large companies, like hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue. We have seen them augment their authentication and say, I want to add stronger MFA using passkeys or using another auth method, but keep my system because right now is not the time to migrate. So I'm seeing these three different customer profiles.
What's the migration process? Like if you're moving from an existing, identity auth provider to Descope, like how easy is that?
It depends on how deeply you integrated, or let's say, were you thoughtful enough to design it right? Because if you designed it as a user service, which integrates with the third-party service, then you're only touching this user service. It's somewhat easier, by the way, for B2C companies than for B2B companies. B2B companies have tenancy, role-based access control. So the identity becomes slightly complex. But we have seen migration anywhere from like a week to 4 weeks migration cycles. So I would say a couple of sprints from a developer perspective, we have seen migration even in a B2B environment where they had tenancy and role-based and everything else.
So clearly you've focused a lot on, developer experience, user experience, and you see that as, a product differentiator for Descope. But like, how hard is it to actually design and build a security product that's actually, super easy to use? And what are some of the, positive consequences of a great experience?
I think it is hard. I will say designing something that's simple to use is very hard. Um, but it's not only about the product. It's about thinking of the entire developer experience, documentation, onboarding onto your website, information on your website. If you look at it, I mean, one thing we said was we will make it self-service to the point where they come into our website. There is no even form. There is a sign up button in most cases where you will just sign in and you are in the product. The documentation is completely open. We measure ourselves, even on our Slack community, we measure ourselves with a very interesting benchmark. Says if somebody asks a question, is there a document to respond to that? Don't answer the question, can I have a document which points to that? And if there is not, why is there not? So in my opinion, the developer experience is not only about the ease of use of the product. It's about the documentation. It's about the website. Are you giving the right information? So if you see our website, even for a young company like ours, it's very verbose. We have everything that a customer would ask. Want to give them the information, and same with documentation. So that's kind of the design. The positive consequences, I think, Sean, incredible stories where I have people didn't talk to us, came in, developed the whole thing, and then talk to us, says, hey, want to upgrade to the pro tier. Or we learn about it, they launched, and I have 1,000 MAUs suddenly one fine day because they onboarded thousands of users onto the platform. So people are building this on their own. They go deploy this on their own. So I feel our G2 reviews are talking about our experience all the time. So that's kind of the positive impact. And I think this helps us get into that ecosystem of younger companies, which, I mean, by the way, it's not that those companies don't talk to us. I mean, the developers come back and give us feedback. In fact, I see contributions going into our SDK. It says, hey, amazing product, but here is something I want to improve. Here's the like pull request. And that's very, very, very satisfying when such a thing happens.
Yeah, absolutely. I think most like companies sort of underestimate how hard it is to actually create like a really, really great self-serve experience. Like most API-based products, developer tools and stuff like that, they kind of assume that people can, under 15 minutes can essentially, sign up, not talk to anybody, not have to like dig deep into like documentation, be up and running and make their first, API call or whatever it is for the tool. But if you, in actual like tests, like almost every single company fails at that. Like most people like actually end up giving up because they aren't able to hit that. And there's sort of this holy grail from Ori Peckelman in the developer experience space of like the 3-30-3 rule of essentially being able to like understand a product in 3 minutes, make your first API call in such a time and so forth. Yeah, exactly. And everybody thinks that they're at that level, but like most companies are not even close to reaching that level.
Yeah, I mean, it's not easy. I think, Sean, it's not easy. And I would not say our work is done, right? I mean, we continuously internally challenge ourselves to get better there. I think my big learning is one, think of more than product, think of docs and product and the website, right? Learn what the product is in 3 minutes is a good point. It's like, unless your website is outright clear of what you do, it's very hard. That's one. But two, it's also not about the happy case. I mean, people optimize the happy scenario and the happy path, and most companies get that right. What they don't get right is the unhappy scenario. It's like if somebody went off the trail, did not finish your wizard, and clicked somewhere else. Now they're lost. What do you do then?
Yeah, absolutely. So as we start to wrap up, I want to look towards sort of the future. What do you think the future of authentication is? Like, what's your prediction for when something like passwords will actually go away?
I think it's funny. It's like things take longer and cost more is the normal philosophy. I do agree, but I'm a eternal optimist. I think, in my opinion, we are starting to see the new apps use password less and less. So if you consider a 5 to 7 year app life cycle where new applications will start to dominate and the old applications go away, you'll start to see a good pivotal shift 7 years from now that majority of the apps are some sort of a passwordless experience. Social logins are dominating heavily right now, if you think about it. And I think I'm starting to see most of the apps that even support passwords starting to support social logins in addition. So I would say 7 years. But when will they go away? I think go away is a very long time horizon. We have seen long tail for everything. I think what needs to be done is one, more awareness, which is how do other methods work better? Why are they more secure? And then I think the long pole will be here, which is regulation. There are still regulations requiring. They don't require passwords, but the point is that the regulation requires strong password. If I'm building an app and need to comply with that, now I have a decision to make. Do I fight that by saying I have no password, which is strong password, or do you just have password, which is a strong password? And most of the B2B app developers will try to say, I don't want to fight this. If an oil and natural gas company wants strong passwords, let me give them passwords.
Do you think that the standard will become the passkey method?
I think passkeys are seeing adoption, so passkeys will see strong adoption. I'm a believer. I think a combination of some sort of a one-time authentication, we call it one-time in our internal lingo, whether it's a magic link and OTP, those are one-time. So combination of one-time social login and passkeys will prevail. I'm not sure that passkeys will primarily become the number one authentication method. I think currently the trend is social logins are leading. But I think a combination of social login and passkey probably will be where we'll end up. That's my prediction. Or a combination of one-time auth method of some sort and passkey.
Yeah. I mean, you could have a combination of essentially the social login at the app level, but then the actual provider of the social login, like the Googles, the Metas of the world, use passkey. So is there anything else you'd like to share or add before we say our goodbyes?
No, I think to summarize, I think, Sean, from my perspective, what really, if you're building a new app now, or if you have an app and you do auth, the thing to think about is user experience for your end users, developer experience for your own developers, and the side effect of security, because we started this podcast with 80% of breaches by DBIR were because of passwords. All these three need to be thought through together when you're deciding on. You sacrifice on one of these three pillars, you're not going to be in a good state. So end user experience, developer experience, and security all need to be thought through when you're making choices on the auth method.
Yeah, you want to be in the intersection of that Venn diagram.
Yeah.
Well, Rishi, I want to thank you so much for being here. I really enjoyed our conversation. You gave me hope for the future that someday that I won't have to remember quite so many passwords. So I'm excited for that future. But thanks so much for joining us. And I'd love to have you back down the road.
Absolutely, Sean. Thanks for having me. Thank you.
Cheers.